one of the kind of gurus of marketing and social marketing. He's going to talk to us this morning about ServiceDominant Logic and its implications for social marketing. Bob.
Thank you, Jeff. Get my slides up here. And oh, it's up. Okay. Thank you. I couldn't see those. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about change. Jeff mentioned the importance of change, but kind of the hesitancy around change. Probably two of the most preeminent thought leaders in marketing in the 20th century are Phil Kotler, who you'll hear from shortly, but also Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker, before his death, actually about 15 years ago, mentioned that the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, is to act with yesterday's logic. And we find that many companies, many organizations, many enterprises continue to kind of operate with an old industrial economy type of logic, very much a kind of a manufacturing type of logic, characterized along this dimension I call the old reality. If you think about the organizations you work with or you consult for, and you compare kind of this old reality versus the new reality, hopefully you'll see, especially if you'd work with them for a couple decades, that they're kind of shifting to this new reality from kind of a very rigid, very hierarchical command and control, heavy emphasis on long-term strategic planning and analysis, to a very kind of flexible, adaptive, sense and respond, very kind of collaborative type of world. That particular shift is something that I've attempted to document by looking at how we use language. Our language is always co-created. Governments can't mandate what words mean, nor any authority, but words kind of bubble up to kind of characterize what's happening. And you'll see shifts occur over the last 30 years between talking about a goods economy to a service economy to now a service economy. And the word service singular means something very important. Services plural means kind of intangible units of output. At universities, unfortunately, many times in central administration and the Office of Institutional Research, they refer to students as revenue-producing units. They're not revenue-producing units, but you think about intangible units of output or number of beds filled in a hotel. Service is the concept of doing something for another individual. It's a little bit of a different concept. We move from talking about products to offerings to experiences, from features and attributes to benefits to solutions, from value added to co-production to co-creation of value. You can kind of look down here. I want to focus on this one that was really illustrated with the video that we just saw, that we're moving more from kind of a promotion approach to integrated marketing communications to dialogue, that our effectiveness in social marketing and marketing campaigns, regardless of the organization, is about viewing the market as a conversation, okay? And that video that you just saw, the ultimate objective is to get people involved in conversation and dialogue, okay? Individuals have always done this, but now we're saying let's be more proactive and let's try to involve them in that. When I talk to the executive community in North America and Europe, where I speak a lot about this goods-dominant logic or this industrial logic, it's really a logic of separation, that things are apart. We took production out of the cottage. We had production and consumption in the cottage, and we moved people to factories. We think about that as an industrial revolution, but the reason that revolution occurred is because of communication and transportation. We could transport people and materials relatively inexpensively, so we could take them out of the cottage and put them into the factory. But this current revolution is also about communication and transportation, but increasingly transporting things by digitizing them. Many digital products exist, and transporting them through the electromagnetic spectrum, but even now transmitting instructional codes to digital things to do 3D printing and to print locally objects and so on. So these revolutions of kind of manufacturing really are always driven by communication and transportation revolutions. But it kind of created this logic that the producers were the smart people and the consumers kind of passive and dull. And this was true whether it was like the physician was smart, the patient didn't know, and they had to be told what to do, that the teacher was the person with the wisdom and the student was the person that didn't know anything, that the minister had divine revelation, and the minister and the congregation would kind of listen to that and not participate in a lot of the modern religions. And so this kind of separation is coming back to kind of an integration into kind of a togetherness. And that's what we mean when we talk about the market as a conversation and dialogue. The problem is that many organizations that try to kind of take the current technology and try to apply it to areas are really still using a goods-dominant logic. So if you take personalized medicine, what that really means is that we kind of personalize and we give Bob certain drugs and Sally different drugs and we customize to that. But we're still not involving that individual in their health. And I love the prior comment about kind of moving away from just thinking about health. Health is usually defined as the absence of disease as opposed to wellness, which is a much broader type of concept. So the logic of SD logic, service-dominant logic, that Steve Vargo and I talk about, is really a logic of togetherness, that we talk about individuals and actors co-creating their health, co-creating their family experiences, co-creating the driving experience. You can name any particular thing that we're involved in what we think about consumption, and it's that kind of co-creation type of phenomena where they're each kind of sensing and experience, integrating resources, making kind of recipes, algorithms, and kind of learning through that. And communication becomes very, very, very critical. Okay. Each of you and each human on the planet houses in their apartments, we stop the flow of information. Okay. It's when the lockdown was lifted, when individuals walked out, and one gentleman walked out into the backyard and saw the blood droppings that led to the boat, that we uncovered where the suspects were. But when we closed off the system and we didn't let the information flow, there was no discovery. Okay? And so what we increasingly see is each of us are really part of this market conversation. It's very, very critical to understand what's happening. The good news is that's how we start out. Okay? We start out wanting to be social. If you go and look at the kindergarten in Ontario or in Tucson, Arizona, or in Chicago, where Phil is, the kids are interacting. It's actually applied learning. They're bringing in policemen and nurses, and they're learning from them. They have all their stuff around the room where they put it up and they display it, and they come home and show their parents what they're doing. They're very kind of social. They're little sponges. You've been around children. They're sponges. They want to learn. They want to interact. Here's a little boy who kind of tells the doctor that he wants to listen to the doctor's heart, okay? But then we socialize people and we separate them, and so you go into big lecture halls or here. I mean, you're all kind of sitting out here, and I'm supposedly the expert, but you know more than I know collectively, probably individually also, okay? And we train people to respect these experts where there's this logic of separation, because the doctor really knows the best. So look at this old gentleman. He's staring at this doctor or gazing at him like it's God, I mean, look at his look there, He would never think about asking that doctor to listen to his heart, You think, well, gee, that's kind of taboo, okay? But the good news is that's how we start out. We started as social creatures. We want to be social, but we've kind of institutionalized people through the industrial era. And I'm not down on the industrial era. That was appropriate at the time. But we've kind of moved beyond that. And so the long journey is really kind of from thinking about taking things to market. We have limited supplies of things, so we develop kind of market mechanisms. And when we talked about the wealth of nations, and Adam Smith talking about the wealth of the nation. He very much this is kind of pre-internet, pre-jet transportation, and so you made things, you got raw materials, you shipped them to other countries or colonies, and you brought back other materials, and so the market and taking things to market was really, really critical. The early days of marketing was about distribution. The early marketing departments were, how do you take eggs to market and pork to market, and how do you transport? Then we went to kind of this administrative era of marketing too. Actually, Ronald Coase wrote an article in 1936 called The Nature of the Firm. And he basically said firms get big because they want to avoid the market, okay? They ultimately have to sell to the market, but they do things within the firm. They make things, they do things. They always don't go out and hire day laborers for CMOs or for CEOs or production workers, but they kind of do that within the firm. So that's a whole area of kind of marketing too. And now the dominant institution that's emerging is the internet. Now, when you have the internet or when you have the bureaucracy with the administrative management, the middle one there, the prior thing doesn't disappear. It kind of gets layered on it. So we still have markets. Markets aren't going away. They may go away at some point. Somebody invents something different, but markets are still there. Firms are still there. But this network type of approach, which Phil and Ackrell have wrote wonderful articles about, really becomes a critical thing to try to understand marketing. My ideas around ServiceDominant Logic actually came from something I read in a publication written in 1848 by Frederick Bastiat, which frankly virtually all economists ignores, all management scholars ignored. And Bastiat said that, if you really want to understand economics, you have to understand that what we all do is we exchange service with one another. We invent money then as a medium of exchange. We invent goods in organizations, but at the end of the day, we're all exchanging service with one another. But Plato said the same thing. If you look at the second book of the Republic, okay, and if you read this short quote, but read I can send you about 10 pages out of the second book, which are very interesting. It's basically about the division of labor and specialization, okay? And that the way the state forms, the way the state of Ontario forms or other states form, is through people helping each other and then building organizations and so on. So it's all about service exchange, and we need to keep that. And I find that very refreshing when I talk to my students in principles of marketing, that what marketers are is helping to facilitate the exchange of service among human actors, okay? It's not producing and selling and promoting. Sure, we get to that, but we're all exchanging service with one another. What's interesting is if you look at the literature in biology, about 20 years ago in biology, in ecology, they start to realize that, sure, predator-prey relationships exist, but the dominant form actually is what they call mutualism. If you Google the word mutualism, you'll find a scholar by the name of Judy Bronstein, who's a well-known zoologist. And she basically documents many, many types of win-win collaborative exchanges. My favorite one is the crocodile here, where the crocodile opens its mouth. This particular species of bird goes in and cleans the teeth, and so they get nutrition services in return for dental services, basically. It's amazing the example she has come up with. So we view everything as a service. We view, if you think about your kitchen, we have kitchen appliances. We think about those as helping you do self-service, but everything is a service. I can provide that service directly, so I'm providing it directly to you, or I can divide it through goods. I could write a book. But even if I say I'm providing it to you directly, we have all kinds of goods. We have the computer, we have the clicker here, we have the microphone, and so on. So if we kind of view products as something that people hire to perform a service, okay? And this is something Clayton Christensen has said, is actually, if you look at Phil's 1967 book on marketing management, he talks about goods providing a service. He recognizes that. But I also could provide that service many times in alternative ways. So in terms of back care management, certainly I can have medical devices and goods that help to kind of cure that, but also could teach people how to better take care of themselves. As we heard from the prior speaker, to be well and to be healthy. This is something I taught. It's wrong. It's the most dangerous teaching that we have in business schools. It basically says that, you know, we have suppliers that take things and process things, and we call that value creation. And sure, it's economic value creation, perhaps that's how we measure it by the government. And then we have these nasty consumers that kind of use up and consume this stuff, so they're kind of value destroyers. And you start to think, well, is there any wonder why we have a sustainability problem? Because the only way kind of it works then is like then we go back and when we destroy that value and kind of produce more stuff and push it through the system, as opposed to viewing products as total kind of service flows. If you look at in Durham, Ontario, the county courthouse that was built a couple years ago that received an award from the Royal Canadian Architects. They had a contract where that was design, build, and operate, okay? And so the organization that designed, built, and operated that provides everything except for the justices. So it causes them to think about the whole system and the energy consumption and the maintenance in a very kind of positive type of way. So what I encourage you to think about is think about not consumers and producers or physicians and patients, but resource integrators. We're all little resource integrators, and we all massively co-create value. Okay, nobody does anything on their own. Even something as simple as a pencil, nobody in this room can make a pencil. Nobody in Ontario, nobody in North America, nobody in the world can make, a single person can make a pencil. Nobody could go out and go to the woods and cut down the tree because they'd need a vehicle probably or a car, and then look at everything that's involved in making a car, and then they would have to dry the wood, and then they'd have to split the wood. Actually, pencils are made because they kind of split the wood, and then they'd have to go out and get graphite, and then they'd have to shape that graphite, and then they'd have to paint, and that involves chemicals and processing, and then they'd have to stamp this emblem in there, and then they have to refine for metal and get mineral rights and property rights and wholesale and transport and process all that stuff, and then the eraser is kind of from a rubber derivative, so they'd have to kind of go and get that. Nobody in this room can make a pencil like that, and that's really kind of interesting, let alone a mouse, a computer mouse, and you look at everything that's involved in that. So we're all kind of co-creators. The good thing is this is starting to naturally happen now with this kind of collaborative marketing with type of approach, where individuals are struck with a particular disease, they get encouraged, they put up a website, they build a community, they share with other individuals. You have massive collaborations occurring across large geographic areas, from companies that used to view themselves as competitors but now collaborating together. In the US, we have this Automate Blue Button initiative which comes out of the federal government, which is basically encouraging hospitals and physicians and other actors to help build kind of a national medical records type of system. So that's occurring. So if you think about your social marketing, think about an actor as a resource integrator. In economics, we think about the allocation of resources, and that's important. But what's more dominant is we integrate resources together. We actually integrate market-facing resources. So when I came here, I came with market-facing resources. I went and bought this suit of clothes, not for this event, but I went to the market and bought those. I purchased my car, I purchased gasoline, I went to the Tucson airport, but that involved then public resources because the airport is run by the Federal Aviation Administration and derivatives of that. I came into Canada. I used public roadways in Canada, used a taxi that somebody paid for. I used private resources. Craig asked me, Craig and I were friends. He put me in touch with Jeff, okay, and so that was kind of a favor and helping out people. We kind of do that. And then we kind of have recipes and algorithms for integrating those things together. and we develop new resources, and we actually have 3 types of currency, and this is something I think social marketers need to be more involved in. There's certainly economic currency. We have social currency. We have favors we do for each other in the household and with other individuals, and then we have public currency, and that's kind of taxation. And for that, there's kind of service flows and service exchanges there. So if we start to look at these resource integrating actors and this whole kind of sea of other actors, the other thing that social marketers need to better understand are institutions. Institutions are ways of coordinating human behavior. We don't spend enough time on those particular institutions. The prior example that was given in terms of smoking and so on, there's a social institution of young people getting together and doing things together. That's part of what we've socialized people to do. Some of those institutions cover the whole system. They're kind of meta institutions. So again, in the terrible tragedy in Boston, the meta institution that held them together was some type of sense of unity of the nation. So, you know, you went to New York and you found New York playing Sweet Caroline and honoring and respecting. So they kind of said, well, you know, we have differences, but there's kind of these meta institutions. Some of them are unique to individual actors. What's interesting in terms of social marketing, and actually all marketing, is that from these micro actions of all these actors interacting together, trying to improve their health or cope with a disease that they have, and bringing in other social actors and their families and so on, that kind of builds up this kind of meso industry type of structures over time. Then that determines where hospitals are located and where pharmacies and drugstores are located, where fitness studios and jogging trails and so on. And that builds kind of a macro system. Part of that macro system is national regulatory types of controls and taxation types of systems, but then that filters down and impacts the micro actors. So as you get older, for example, you think, well, gee, I want to live closer to where healthcare facilities are, and so on. But there's many, many other types of examples there where the macro structure kind of influences what we do. The World Social Marketing Conference couldn't go to a small city. You have 500 people. That means you need a large hotel, okay? And so the hotel industry structure that's built up influences how Jeff and others determine what particular venues that they're going to go to. So what emerges then, and think about this, think about kind of moving away from thinking about the rational actor and think about actors this way, that you saw that big system of resource integrating actors. There's no way they can globally optimize, but what they do is they pivot. And if you study human actors and you do ethnography, you'll see that they kind of take a couple steps at a time. Herbert Simon talked about this in terms of procedural rationality. They're very kind of effectual. They actually develop institutions to standardize things. Many things are standardized, even product forms. Everybody came in here today and they sat on a chair. A chair has become an institutionalized way of attending and listening to somebody. You could have sat on the floor, you could have laid on the floor, you could have hung from the ceilings, you could have stood up. There's all kinds of, you're all facing me, you're all being polite, you're not talking, okay? Those are kind of institutionalized types of practices. They're all very proficient. They're not very proficient at many things, so we all specialize, and that's been going on for hundreds of thousands of years. And actually, we're all restless. Forget about customer satisfaction. You know, sure, you may try a little bit, but customers will never be satisfied. Your spouses will never be satisfied. Your students will never be satisfied. We're just kind of restless, you know. We're kind of restless beings, you know. And if we're satisfied, it's kind of temporary, you know. And so they're always kind of restless, and then they're kind of creating resources. So we're kind of very abductive thinkers, seeking standardized solutions. We're mutualistic. Sure, we go to war and we kill people, but we're largely mutualistic. And we're actually very disruptive, okay? Actors are disruptive. When they change, they may not change the party they're interacting with, but they change those actors around them. And so my last slide here is thinking about the wealth of the nation, the wealth of Canada, not around economic wealth. Economic wealth needs to be there. We can't forget that. Just like I said, we're not going to get rid of markets or organizations. but think about it as healthy and knowledgeable and skilled and highly specialized individuals, because at the end of the day, that's what I can take to the market. I can take money, but I won't have money unless I have specialized skills, unless you have a big trust account. And the government doesn't take it. And so that's what we need. We need healthy and knowledgeable. That's what we need to invest in, okay? And then give them a sense of agency and control of their destiny so they can provide service to other individuals for massive value co-creation and a viable system. Thank you very much. And in closing, let me mention, my mother grew up in Leamington, Ontario, so I used to go over a lot of times to the farm in Leamington, Ontario, so it's just great to be back in Ontario. Thank you.
Thanks. I think what we'll do is take a few questions now. So do we have a roving mic? Yeah, okay, we've got some mics. So any questions you'd like to, or points you'd like to pick up from the presentation? Or challenges?
Jeff, we have one that way.
Okay, yeah, we've got somebody here. Can we have a mic down here?
Thank you. It's Stephen Johnson, Collaborative Change. I think we're seeing interesting things in the emergence of a sharing economy, collaborative consumption, product service systems, etc. Is it fair to say, and is this of benefit to the social marketing community, that value in the future will be more about access than ownership?
I think so. I think access becomes very, very critical, and I see the mindset kind of shifting to individual actors realizing that, like in Durham, like we don't necessarily have to control everything. We don't have to control the receptionist and the food service and the washing of the windows and so on. And so I think there's more and more kind of a notion of access. And if I have access in the use of the service flow that comes from tangible products, but even intangibles, that's going to be more. But that's what is going to be up to the actors to determine that within the extent to which government and other organizations allow them a sense of agency.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, so this one here. Here first, yeah, and then.
Hi, yeah, Stuart Jackson. You referred to wellness, and one of the challenges that we certainly have in UK, in government, I suppose, is getting our, particularly our local government, where public health has now just been re-embedded away from other health. They don't understand how wellness can actually be very transformative for the whole system, and just a view really in terms of how do you...
Right, so I think we have a challenge in society as we've built up. We've built certain measurements and certain words to capture things, and then we think that's the real thing. So we think, well, GMP and unemployment, that really represents the prosperity of the nation, you know, as opposed to combining that with measures of happiness and wellness. And I think that's one of the major challenges that you face in all organizations when you shift to new institutional logic, whether it's ServiceDominant or some other type of logic, that our language is very, very controlling, okay? And, you know, if you talk to the experts in medicine and health, as I said, health is the absence of disease. Well, you can have a body that has an absence of disease and it drops dead. Actually, if you talk to people in ecology and zoology, you see these ecosystems in nature that look very healthy, and then within months the system collapses. So there's just a lot of things we don't know about that. And so I think this gets to my last slide. People ask me, what is a viable system? I don't know. We better figure that out. How resilient is this system? Okay, if you take certain actors out of the system, does it collapse or not? Okay, how much, we saw that kind of with the financial crisis. How much liquidity do you need? How much adaptability? How much learning do you need? And so on. And so our biggest barriers to change are cultural barriers. It's our mindset. It's not the technology. I mean, we can improve the technology, but this is not like going to the asteroids, you know. There's certain things we know how to do. In the U.S., there's a high proportion of the prisoners, if you take out the few white-collar prisoners that get thrown in prison, and you look at the blue-collar prisoners, there's a high proportion that have learning disabilities. Well, we know how to solve learning disabilities, except they happen to be in families where they didn't have the income or the capability to do something about that. So instead of voluntary exchange, they went to forced exchange. So the challenge we face, whether it's wellness or even what is corporate performance, well, we define that as very precisely earnings per share, return on investment. But to perform as a corporation is much bigger than that. So it's that cultural barriers that are just really critical.
Okay, I think we'll take one more question. At the back here.
Hi, Bob. Craig Lefebvre from University of South Florida. Thanks for coming up. Enjoyed hearing a little bit of ServiceDominant Logic. One of the things that first caught my attention with your papers was the concept of value and use. And going back to the slide that had the arrows, I mean, one of the things you talk about is the evolution from GoodsDominant Logic, which was basically characterized by trying to figure out the benefit and baking in a benefit to the product, the service, the offering. In social marketing, we do the same thing. Health communications, we do the same thing. We try and figure out the benefit for a consumer or an audience. People know how I hate those words. And then we try and develop products and services and messages that communicate that benefit. When you move to ServiceDominant Logic, you guys start talking about this idea of value and use. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about the difference of how ServiceDominant Logic thinks about that value-benefit chain as opposed to how GoodsDominant Logic approach would.
Thank you, Craig. And again, value and exchange will always exist. We'll continue to price things, so that doesn't go away. We look at how we use things and encourage a lot of ethnography to try to understand how people use. But we even go beyond that, Craig, and I have to thank the prior speaker. We didn't coordinate our remarks, okay? But what was demonstrated in that advertisement was value in context. Value in context is beyond value in use. So I can use something. I can use a cigarette, okay? But using a cigarette in a social situation gives you a richer meaning of that particular value exchange. And so we increasingly talk about, look at value in context. Not only use, but the context is the other actors that are around you and the other resources, okay? So you think, well, you have an automobile. I'm using that, I'm driving that. But if I have kids in there and we're going to a soccer game, that's a little bit different. I'm going out on a date, that's a little bit different, or a road trip or whatever. So value is not only specific to use, but context. And I think that concept of context can be very, very powerful in social marketing. And now we increasingly have the vehicles through the smartphone and Twitter and so on, because people forward things and they retweet. So we start to understand through being able to spider the web and grab that data, the context around the actors of what's happening. But I think it's a very, very critical insight if you're going to start to try to get behavioral change. Because if you're just looking at value in exchange, you're thinking, well, gee, it's price or the barriers to price and effort and so on, versus this richer context that becomes really, really critical.
I think we're going to stop there. If we have time at the end, we'll take a few more questions. Okay, well, thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
So, do you want to sit here or go down?